Hey now, and welcome to Cities and Urban Land Use, Part 10. In today's video, we're going to ask this essential question: how do cities function in the global core and wealthier semi-peripheral states? Now, analyzing how a city functions, we can look that there is the basic sector. That's made up of local businesses or firms that produce goods for export and generate an inflow of money. Manufacturing and resource-oriented firms, like logging or mining, are usually considered to be basic sector firms because of their profits depend largely upon non-local factors, or in this case, as you can see, the construction of a Boeing airplane. The non-basic sector, or the service sector, is composed of firms that depend largely upon local business conditions or are responsible for the functioning of the city itself. If we're talking about anything like dry cleaners, restaurants, grocery stores, local transit, schools, city government, hospitals, these are all different things that are part of the non-basic sector. Now, understanding that, we take a look at the economic base theory. Now, the economic base is the ratio of basic to non-basic workers. The means of strengthening and growing the local economy, according to this theory, is to develop and enhance the basic sector, the engine of the local economy. Now, if you take a look at this chart to understand it, there's a multiplier effect that happens. And this increases as a city grows. So a new basic industry will create jobs in the non-basic sector, directly or indirectly. New workers who come into the city demand goods and services. Those who perform those services themselves demand even more services. So a grocery clerk, for example, must also buy groceries. But it also shows us that the larger centers are more self-contained, possessing more of the basic needs and the amenities that people want. To understand what I'm talking about, if you have a lower population city center, and this is just a hypothetical example, you can see there's a lower percentage of non-basic workers at the lower end, and it gets to a higher percentage as you move up. Same thing is said at the lower end. There are more basic workers at a smaller city, and you can see that it decreases as the population would increase. Back in the 1940s, Chauncey Harris, who had done the multiple nuclei model and worked on the peripheral model, he noticed that certain cities had a functional specialization. That is that many U.S. cities were closely identified with certain products. So, for example, talk about Pittsburgh steel or Detroit automobiles. But as urban centers grow, they tend to lose their functional specialization. So they become more diversified, and that can be seen along the economic base theory as well. Now, this doesn't occur very often today, but there are certain cities that are quite specialized. For example, Las Vegas is certainly known for gambling, and Orlando is certainly known as a resort town. Cities certainly may grow or shrink due to industrial growth. In fact, it is arguably the single greatest factor related to the size of cities. However, they may grow for other reasons. Many cities today are close to resource nodes, such as Georgetown, Texas, close to Austin, and one of the fastest growing cities in the entire United States as of 2015. This is due to many factors, including the jobs boom, particularly due to oil and natural gas production, but also due to other factors, such as the relatively low cost of land and homes, plus Texas has no state taxes, and the warmer climate is also a pull. In fact, Texas has 5 of the 11 fastest growing cities in the United States as of 2015. Then there's the story of Dulles, Virginia, which is technically not a true city, but an unincorporated area, meaning it doesn't have its own municipal government. Commercial development can lead to urban growth around transport hubs such as seaports, rail depots, or airports, such as what happened around Dulles International. The ease of transportation around these hubs attracts people and businesses alike. The United States is the only country in the world in which a majority of its population lives in the suburbs, as opposed to urban or rural environments. As such, we are arguably the country that leads in urban and suburban sprawl, which is the outward spreading of a city and its suburbs. Usually, this has a negative connotation and is associated with the unrestricted growth of residential, commercial, and transportation zones. Sprawl is usually seen as a wasteful and inefficient result of suburbanization. Nonetheless, it is also the result of human tendencies, in which many prefer their own space and more of it. While suburbanization is not uniquely an American phenomenon, most other cities found in the core and richer semi-peripheral states tend to be more compact and less sprawled. Between 1970 and 2000, 8 of the 10 largest cities in the United States lost population as people migrated outward to the suburbs. By contrast, concerning our northern neighbors in Canada, 6 of the 10 largest cities grew in population during that same time. Calgary experienced the largest growth at over 110%. This trend of urban growth has largely remained consistent in Canada to this day. Because more of the upper and middle class has remained in the urban areas, the Canadian inner cities have experienced far less dilapidation. In fact, most of their city centers contain many of the wealthiest populations, keeping the cityscape cleaner and less blighted due to the higher tax base and the wealthy investing more in their own neighborhoods. As has been the case with Canadian cities remaining fairly compact, the same has largely held true with the vast majority of Western and Northern European cities. Most cities in Europe are much older than any found in the Americas, and these old city centers were pre-industrial, constructed through the accretion of winding roads and buildings, seldom with any strict planning in mind. You can see the original city center in this image of Barcelona at night, but you can also see the gridded and better designed modern city streets outside the original core. As more European states are unitary, the central governments have had more influence on urban planning than in the United States, and they have made efforts to restrict outward growth. One way this has been done is through the use of greenbelts, or land surrounding urban areas designated to remain undeveloped or retained as agricultural land. You can see this map of greenbelts in England, and this larger scale map shows the greenbelt around London. This map of Glasgow, Scotland shows how wealthy Europeans tend to live in or close to the city centers. And in this graphic, you can see that the new housing in the US has largely occurred without central government planning. So there are more discontinuous developments. Whereas in the UK, growth is likely to be in planned and more compact towns. Some of this has been done for environmental purposes, to improve air quality and reduce pollution. But it has also come out of necessity, since gasoline prices in Europe are sometimes 3 to 4 times more expensive than in the United States. Although, as you can see in the chart, this is largely self-inflicted due to very high gasoline taxes. As a result, Europeans utilize public transport more than most US Americans. For instance, Londoners using the Underground, or the Tube, their subway system. While laws like greenbelts have helped to rein in sprawl to some degree, critics argue the environmental benefits have been limited, housing prices have risen faster than they should have by restricting natural growth, and they could actually cause more urban sprawl. If you look carefully at the map of London, you can see the built-up urban area beyond the greenbelt zone. This can arguably lead to longer commutes than if the greenbelt had never been designated. Immigration has long been a trend in European cities, as has been the same with American cities. Ethnic neighborhoods have formed across these cities to varying degrees. For instance, Paris, France has several distinct ethnic neighborhoods, with many immigrants coming from Algeria in northern Africa, which was a former colony of theirs. Many immigrants have settled in public housing, which has typically been arranged according to ethnic backgrounds. France has largely held a policy protecting multiculturalism, allowing people to maintain their own customs without much pressure to assimilate. More times than not, these policies fail to integrate the newer populations, and since they often remain in poorer neighborhoods, resentment can grow, and sometimes violence erupts, as was the case with the French riots that broke out in 2005. By contrast, in the Netherlands, their capital, Amsterdam, has absorbed immigrants with housing based on a sequential basis, which prevents residential segregation. Now, to round out our tour of cities in the core and semi-periphery, we'll take a quick look at Eastern Europe, which tends to be less affluent than their Western counterparts. This is largely because they were built up while under the influence of communism and strict central government planning. Many of these cities have microdistricts, which are residential zones flanked by public buildings. They have no true CBDs, and even though these states are now fairly free democracies, the built environment has constrained their economic development. And even further across Eurasia, many cities in East Asia are some of the most modern in the world. Japan has long been one of the most advanced societies, and other states like China and South Korea have had some of the most recent urban development, making these cities more modern than many in the West. That said, many of these cities also suffer from heavy pollution due to their dense populations and plethora of factories.
That is correct.